Hello, and welcome to the next part of our Music Hum online content, the Romantic Era. Anyhow, so we talked about some of these, what I called flagrant romantics, Paganini and Franz Liszt, but I want to talk about two, maybe three of the other type that I'll call conservative romantics. Maybe I'll just put up here flagrant. Okay. And down here, we'll put conservative. And it wasn't that they were conservative in their music. If anything, they were even more kind of experimental in what they did with their music than Paganini and Liszt. Like I said, they were just kind of taking chords and arpeggiating them and kind of going berserk to show off their performance capabilities. These guys were really interested in what Beethoven had done in terms of pushing forward the musical rhetoric. How do you construct these pieces? What kind of harmonies can you use? And foremost among them was a composer that you've probably heard of named Johannes Brahms. Okay, he lived from 1833 to 1897, had a pretty good life. And he was a professional composer, basically. Didn't have a huge amount of money, but he was kind of based in Vienna, like a lot of people were back then. Traveled a lot through Germany and kind of met up and became really close friends with another composer we're going to talk about in a second, named Robert Schumann. And Schumann had a wife who was also a composer, and we're going to hear some of her music next time, Clara Schumann. And Brahms fell passionately in love with her. But it seems the best musicological evidence and, historical evidence we have is that they never consummated their passion. Even though Robert Schumann went crazy. We'll talk about that. But they all kind of hung out together, and they took their kind of new approach to music very seriously. I'll talk about that in a second. But to give you a sense of what this music was like, let me play you a little bit from Brahms' Fourth Symphony. Okay, this is actually from the fourth movement, and it gives you a sense of what it's like. Oh, this is the first movement. Excuse me. So it has that kind of passion that we associate with romantic music, but it's definitely a large symphony. It's not a single instrument. It's not, fiercely virtuosic or anything like that. A lot of people thought that Brahms was going to be the heir to Beethoven musically because of the way he took it. And you'll hear in his music the kind of the sweeping passion that you hear in Beethoven's later works, the kind of the swells of volume and orchestration and things like that. So he was quite a composer. I want to play you some of his fourth movement from this symphony because it's kind of intriguing to show you that these guys were taking composition, the craft of it, very seriously. Here we go. Can any of you guess what the form of this is? It's actually an old Baroque form. It's what we call a chaconne, or a repeating series of chords over and over again, just like Dido's Lament in Dido and Aeneas by Purcell. And basically Brahms is just going to play these chords over and over again and elaborate them orchestrationally, musically. He's showing he's like a pretty serious composer here. So, yeah, there's a lot of richness in Brahms. I'm just barely scratching the surface with this, but I can't let Brahms go without playing at least his most famous work that I'm sure you've all heard. Here we go. it's called Brahms' Lullaby for a reason. It's because he actually wrote it, and it is his lullaby. I'm sure you've heard that before. Anyhow, so yeah, Brahms was this, and I'd mentioned Robert Schumann. We're going to take a minute and talk about him for a little bit. Okay, Robert Schumann, and he was born in 1810 and didn't have a hugely long life. He died in 1856, and I had mentioned that he went crazy. Here's his biography. He basically was born in a town called Zwickau in Saxony. His father was a bookseller, a publisher, and he became kind of an accomplished writer as well as a musician, composer, and he had pretty good instruction in music. But he did a couple of things wrong. First thing he did, he had a budding performance career taking shape. I mean, he was also quite talented piano player. He became enamored of, the system that would supposedly make his hands larger. There's some kind of weird contraption that he wore that stretched his fingers out and basically ruined his hands. So he couldn't play very well. That was problem number one. Problem number two is that he contracted syphilis. And when I said he was crazy, well, he actually really was crazy. Tried to commit suicide by jumping in the Rhine. His friends, Brahms and his wife Clara saved him. But eventually he succumbed. And yeah. And because of all this, he's a writer. He's had problems with, being able to perform. He founded a newsletter called the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik. Now, these conservative romantics who saw themselves as the heir to actual music didn't like it all, and probably because of Schumann's particular circumstances, people like Paganini and Liszt, just the flashy players, they called them. So Schumann created this newsletter, and here's the crazy part. He had a number of correspondents and people who would write articles for this newsletter, and they were all him. He would basically adopt different tones in his writing and publish like reviews of music by these people, Florestan and Eusebius. He made up the names, but they all had kind of different tones, but they all just lambasted that flashy music. So it was a kind of an exercise in bizarre personality disorder. And he became kind of serious about this, and he actually, his probably most famous piece is a piece called Carnival. And it's interesting because the form it's a depiction of the parade on Carnival. So this is what we call program music here, where music now isn't abstract. It's meant to abstractly depict a thing. And that's also part of this whole romantic sort of thing. In addition to this nationalism we talked about with Liszt, there's this notion that music can function to, create the world and build the world. And I'm going to just play you a little bit from this Carnival. Okay, this is how it starts. Then he had a lot of Commedia dell'arte characters that were in the parade, and he depicted them musically. For example, here is his depiction of Pierrot, the clown. So you can imagine this clown kind of tumbling around, doing somersaults and things like that, And then behind him comes another Commedia dell'arte character, Arlequin, And then here's the Waltz of the Nobles, that are also, of course, in the parade. Yeah, he's kind of a strange guy. Okay, and just to show you how strange, this is actually his Eusebius, one of his characters that wrote for his play, and this depicts his kind of contemplative side. Okay, oops, yeah, there it is. Okay, and then here is Florestan, one of his characters that depicts his more fiery side, I guess you'd call it. Okay, and like I said, Brahms was deeply in love with his wife, but again, this is just so romantic. You know, they didn't consummate their passion at all, even after he died. Again, they surmise that from letters and such that they would write each other, but they were all pretty good friends. They all kind of hung out together. Another kind of conservative romantic that wasn't particularly in their circle, but they admired his music and his writing, was a Jewish composer named Felix Mendelssohn. And sadly, he died, I think, of tuberculosis. Didn't live all that long. Very, very, oops, feeks, good grief. A very, very accomplished composer, came from a fairly wealthy family. He was a conductor in Leipzig. At this point, you could make your living as performer, as conductor, as composer even. Look at Brahms, Beethoven certainly. He's also very proud, he was an assimilated Jew, very proud of his Jewish heritage. And I'm mentioning that because we're going to see some not so good things happen in the Romantic era, you know, with respect to, you know, Judaism and cultural wars and things like that. But he was a childhood prodigy. His parents recognized this. He had a great education, and in his short life managed to write some just beautiful music. I'm going to play you the first movement of his violin concerto. Again, Beethoven, Mozart, Beethoven, they had explored this idea of concerto, even going back to Vivaldi with the Concerti Grosso, or Brandenburg concertos by Bach, where you had a solo instrument that was quite virtuosic, and it would be played off against like a large orchestra. By this time, the concerto had evolved, so it had generally three movements: the sonata first movement, then the slower second movement, then the final rousing third movement. This is his first movement, and I'll just kind of jump it ahead in a little bit, and you can hear some of the violin, but this is what it sounds like. Okay, and we're going to take it up here so you can hear how the violin part sounds. Just beautiful music. I really like Mendelssohn. Yeah, it's a, you know, you could clearly hear Beethoven's influence, but this even goes back to, you know, Alma Savini's classical approach. Again, that's the reason that they were called conservative romantics. You know, they were heirs to the tradition. They were extending it, but you know, they were serious musicians. They didn't have any truck with this flashy cape wearing, you know, sell your soul to the devil thing, anyhow. But again, I can't underestimate, how beautiful some of Mendelssohn's music was. Here's a piece you've probably heard. It's from a piano suite that he wrote called Songs Without Words. And you've probably heard this one. Yeah, another one that's been absolutely ruined by cartoons. Um, but yeah, I gotta admit, it's a really beautiful melody. And you'll hear he's doing some interesting things with the harmony, too. And in fact, we're gonna follow that up for the next class. You'll see down here I've got a bunch of pieces by Chopin listed. He's kind of a different figure in a way in terms of the kind of society he inhabited. And generally, people consider him a conservative romantic, but yeah, well, we'll talk about him when the time comes. Anyhow, for now, I'm going to close it off, and I'll see you, I guess, on Zoom soon. Alrighty, hope you're enjoying yourselves. Bye.